Hey lady, this ain't Call of Duty. You sure you even know what that rifle does? What secret does this quiet woman hide? The voice came from 2 lanes over, loud, smug, and meant to entertain. She didn't answer, just tightened her scope, adjusted for wind, and let the silence stretch. No one knew her name. No one cared until the third shot landed. And when the wind lifted her sleeve, something showed on her forearm, a faded barcode etched into the skin like it had been burned there. Just below it, SVU8109, the kind of mark no civilian would ever recognize, but the general standing behind her did. And for a full 3 seconds, he couldn't breathe. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. Tuesday morning at Bear Hollow Range began the way most of them did. Quiet, cool, and tucked beneath a rising mist that hadn't yet burned off the pines. The gravel lot was still half empty. Just a few pickup trucks scattered near the front gate in the main shed with its warped floorboards and military-grade ventilation. Evelyn Ward was polishing the bolt assembly of a long-range precision rifle. She moved with the calm efficiency of someone who didn't need to look busy. Her hands, calloused but steady, wiped a faint line of solvent from the receiver before locking the bolt back in place. A faded tan cap covered most of her graying hair, and a dark green work shirt bore a patch that simply read staff. Most people who came to the range assumed she was a part-timer, maybe a veteran, maybe just someone who knew her way around tools. No one paid much attention to the name on the paperwork. Tucked at the bottom of the permit board, owner Evelyn J. Ward. She didn't put up signs. She didn't offer lessons. She just made sure the range was open, clean, and never careless. The regulars appreciated her quiet. The serious shooters knew she didn't say much unless it mattered. And the weekend types, the ones who showed up in tactical vests and talked too loud about calibers they didn't understand, usually left with the impression that Evelyn was just the on-site caretaker. Around 9:40, a rhythm changed. A black SUV pulled up, windows too dark for rental specs. 2 men stepped out, contractors, judging by the cargo pants, matching ballistics packs, and confident swagger that came from working jobs no one questioned too hard. One of them wore a tight gray shirt with the sleeves rolled high, revealing muscular forearms and a minimalist compass tattoo. The other chewed gum and scanned the surrounding hills like he expected trouble. They walked through the main gate without signing in. Evelyn watched from the edge of her bench, wiping her hands with a lint-free cloth. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The camera by the gate logged them both, time-stamped and backed up. Nice little setup, one of them muttered, walking past her. Looks like someone's hobby project got a grant. The other smirked, eyes flicking toward Evelyn's rifle case, resting against the wall. Bet she's one of those Instagram shooter types. Gunfluencer vibes for sure. Evelyn stood, straightened her back, and walked toward the logbook on the counter. She slid it toward them without speaking. Just a glance, measured, polite, uninterested. You know, the gum chewer said, pen hovering over the sign-in line. I think I saw her in a YouTube video about how to hold your rifle like a seal. His friend laughed too loud, the sound bouncing awkwardly off the steel rafters. She didn't react, didn't flinch, just reached for her own clipboard and quietly scribbled in lane number 7. The farthest one, the one that stretched out to just under 1,000 yards and required walking an extra 1/4 mile up the trail behind the gravel berm. By the time they grabbed their gear and sauntered toward lane 3, Evelyn was already halfway up the hill. Bear Hollow had been hers for 3 years, not on paper alone, but in spirit. She'd bought the land under a different name, one restored from her family line, unconnected to any military files. No flags flew at the entrance. No unit patches were framed on the walls. just a locked cabinet of range safety gear, a modest tool bench, and a hand-painted sign that read, "Know your limits before you aim." When she found the place, it had been overgrown and half forgotten. An old ranger station had collapsed just beyond the tree line, but the elevation was clean, the lines of sight were long, and the hills curled just right to cradle noise without bouncing it back. She knew what she wanted. Somewhere quiet, somewhere unremarkable, a place to practice without being seen, and teach when needed without being noticed. The military had folded her flag 3 years ago, a ceremony with no body, a name, carved in the wall behind a locked door. No one ever confirmed what went wrong in the final op, just that she wouldn't be returning. The paperwork said helicopter crash. The truth was buried under more signatures than she cared to count. Evelyn had stopped counting a long time ago. At lane 7, she laid the rifle on the bench with care, unfolding the bipod and locking the legs into the reinforced concrete. She didn't adjust the scope yet. Instead, she sat on the folding stool she kept tucked under the bench and let the wind settle around her. In the distance, paper targets swayed faintly at 900 yards. Back in the office, the range's automated system had flagged today's schedule with a red tag. That wasn't common. General Dalton Reeve was set to arrive before noon. She had no illusions about why Fort Whitlow had been pushing for more civil-military training partnerships, trying to expand local options for marksmanship development. A few months ago, a junior instructor at Whitlow had quietly mentioned Bear Hollow in a readiness report. He hadn't named Evelyn. He didn't know her name, but he mentioned a facility in the mountains with world-class conditions and someone running it who knows their craft. That had been enough to catch someone's eye. Reeves' office had scheduled a walkthrough. Unofficial, of course, no public records, no inspectors, just an informal evaluation of potential external assets. Evelyn didn't care. She'd hosted local sheriff departments before, even a few private contractors running research courses. She didn't ask questions. She just enforced the rules. Muzzle discipline, chamber flags, and no loud mouths beyond the 0 line. Downrange, the two contractors were loading up magazines like they were prepping for war. Evelyn didn't look their way. She adjusted her cheek weld, steadied her breath, and let her mind go blank. The barrel of her rifle gleamed under soft sunlight. The buttstock bore no markings on the outside, no unit crest, no initials. But inside, beneath the surface laminate, embedded with precision and heat, was a faint barcode, a pattern of vertical lines and numbers only visible if the angle was just right and the light unforgiving. She hadn't meant to show it. She hadn't shown anyone anything in 3 years. But sometimes, when the mountain wind stirred just wrong, her left sleeve slipped a little as she set her elbow down. And sometimes, very rarely, that angle found the eye of someone who knew what it meant. The kind of person who had once sat in a command room reading after-action reports that had no return addresses. The kind of person who remembered. Could this barcode reveal a hidden legend? Evelyn didn't know if General Reeve would recognize her. She didn't know if he'd even care. She only knew that when the time came, she would not explain, not apologize, not resurrect the dead. Her hands moved with calm exactness. She checked the chamber, clicked the safety, and eased into position. Behind her, the gravel shifted, the sound of tires on the drive. The general was early, and the range was about to go very, very quiet. Evelyn lowered herself into the prone position on lane 7 with the kind of ease that came from repetition. Her rifle settled into the sandbag cradle like it belonged there. No fuss, no second adjustments, just quiet precision. The range ahead stretched nearly 900 yards, flat at first, then dipping slightly before rising again toward the final berm. Wind flags barely moved, but Evelyn still studied them. She'd learned long ago that stillness could lie. 2 lanes over, The contractors had started warming up. They weren't subtle. Rounds cracked off metal gongs with sharp clangs, followed by exaggerated remarks about real shooters in battlefield conditions. Their voices cut through the silence like static. One of them raised his voice, not quite shouting, but loud enough to cross the lanes. Hope she's got the safety on. Wouldn't want to repeat what was it? That one op where the chick fragged her own guy. His partner laughed through his nose, short and sharp. Yeah, one of those trigger-happy types. PTSD souvenir shots. The words hovered in the air a moment too long. Evelyn didn't move. She didn't speak. She adjusted the magnification dial on her scope by 2 clicks, then set her cheek against the stock. She'd heard worse, much worse. But there was something different when strangers spoke of ghosts they didn't realize were listening. She exhaled slowly, waited for the wind to whisper, then squeezed the trigger. The first shot cracked like a door slamming shut on the past. 900 yards away, the target center punched open cleanly. Dead center. No drift. The sound was clean, authoritative. Not just a hit, a statement. The contractor stopped mid-sentence. One of. Them lowered his rifle, peering toward her lane as if trying to decide whether he'd just imagined it. Evelyn reloaded without hesitation. The second shot came 5 seconds later. The target quivered, but through the spotting scope, it became clear the new hole overlapped the first. Same spot, same impact, near surgical repetition. Behind the main office window, a figure moved. General Reeve had arrived. He watched through the glass for a moment, then turned toward the exit. The automatic lock clicked open as he stepped onto the gravel. Evelyn didn't see him yet. She was focused. The third shot was different, not aimed at the bullseye. Instead, she adjusted slightly left, just a sliver, and targeted a hanging paper tag fluttering on the frame's edge. A square, maybe 2 inches wide, left from a maintenance marker someone forgot to remove. She waited for it to lift in the breeze, and when it did, she fired. The paper severed in half, cleanly sliced by a bullet traveling nearly 3/4 of a mile. One half drifted down like ash. The other caught in a loop of wind and vanished into the brush. Silence. Not respectful silence. Not awe. Shock. The contractors no longer pretended not to look. They were watching her now, not with amusement, but with calculation, like they were finally trying to figure out who she really was. As Evelyn rolled her left elbow slightly to sit up, the sleeve of her work shirt caught on the edge of her jacket strap, just enough to slide back, just enough for the late morning light to catch the inside of her forearm. There, faded slightly, but unmistakable, was a barcode tattoo. Just beneath it, SVU8109. Black ink, old and matte, but razor sharp in detail. General Reeve had been halfway through his first step onto the gravel when he saw it. He stopped, dead still. The boots he wore, polished and perfect, sank slightly into the dirt, but he didn't notice. His eyes were locked on that tattoo, that number, the shape of something he hadn't seen in over 3 years, but hadn't forgotten for a day. SV, Shadow Viper. E8-Z009, August 2010. 9th operator in sequence, assigned to Reconnaissance Team Echo. Specialty, Extreme Range Overwatch. Operational status, deceased. Captain Evelyn Ward. He'd signed the paperwork himself, reviewed the wreckage photos, read the after-action reports that had been scrubbed 5 times before being locked in a vault. Official cause, aircraft failure, unrecoverable remains. Casualty status, KIA. No funeral open to press. Name added to a wall. No one was allowed to visit. But now, 20 feet ahead, that same barcode moved with muscle and breath. Reeves' pulse ticked once, twice, then steadied. He looked around, noting the quiet range. The scattered shooters now frozen in place. Even the contractors, for all their earlier noise, had fallen into a stunned silence. His eyes returned to Evelyn, who was now seated upright, folding her spotting scope into its soft case. Like this had all been just another Tuesday. The general's memory drifted, brief but vivid. 3 years earlier, a private room in the Pentagon, a screen with encrypted satellite imagery, Evelyn's face on the last known visual before comms went dark. She was focused, calm, lying flat in rocky terrain, eyes on the scope, the kind of face that didn't rattle under pressure. Then the radio blackout, then the explosion report. No body ever recovered, just fragments of airframe and one half-melted rifle barrel. He remembered asking the question out loud, "Are we sure she's gone?" No one had answered, and no one had dared investigate further. Because when someone like Captain Ward disappears, it's often not by accident. It's by design. Could this tattoo rewrite her fate? Back at the range, Reeve took another step forward. He saw her hand tighten briefly on the rifle case, then release. Not in fear, in acknowledgement. She knew. She'd always known this moment might come, but she didn't run, didn't hide, didn't explain. Reeve reached up, slowly removed his service cap, and let the silence stretch between them. Evelyn stood, not in greeting, just to face him properly. Wind moved across the range again. This time it didn't touch her sleeve. The tattoo remained visible, plain as day, and Reeve realized something as he looked at her. Some ghosts don't haunt. Some ghosts just wait. General Reeve approached with steady steps, eyes never leaving hers. He didn't move like a man meeting someone new. He moved like a man approaching something he wasn't sure he was ready to believe. Evelyn didn't flinch. She didn't reach for a hand. She didn't smile. She simply looked him in the eye and said quietly, "I've been expecting this for 3 years." The wind moved behind her, stirring the canvas target frames in the distance. Reeve stood still, letting the silence stretch. "I thought you were dead," he said, voice low, stripped of rank. "According to your signature," she replied. "I am." There was no bitterness in her tone, no accusation, only fact. He nodded once, then slowly put his cap back on, adjusting it like a man trying to reclaim structure in a conversation that had none. "How?" he asked. But they both knew that question wasn't about logistics. It was about choice. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She bent to pick up a single spent casing that had bounced off the bench and rolled to her boot. She turned it over once in her hand before slipping it into her coat pocket. Then gently, "Some missions don't end clean." That one ended with a decision. Reeve exhaled through his nose. Not frustration, not relief, just recognition. He glanced sideways, subtle, calculated, and noticed the 2 contractors standing awkwardly by the lane divider. One of them still held his rifle, but the muzzle pointed straight down. The other had removed his gloves, fingers twitching nervously at the seams. They weren't saying anything now. Reeve looked back to Evelyn and tilted his head just slightly, voice barely above a whisper. "You know they're listening." "I know, Nye," she said, "but I'm not here for them." His eyes dropped briefly to the barcode on her forearm, still exposed in the sunlight. The numbers hadn't faded. The ink hadn't blurred. It was still exact like everything else about her. "You disappeared after Overwatch pulled the trigger," he said. "Team Bravo extracted, but the press got wind of the op. We couldn't hold the timeline clean." Evelyn's jaw tensed slightly, but she didn't speak. "You took the shot," he continued, "and it worked. You saved the package, but the fallout." She nodded once. "The fallout cost us." She finished for him, "and cost me my place." Reeve looked out toward the mountain ridgeline. The air felt heavier up here. But maybe that was memory. You were blamed. No one said it out loud, she said, her voice level. But when the exfil plan changed and the helicopter didn't come back, I got the message. That part she never forgot. She'd waited under a tarp for 13 hours after the extraction point had gone dark. Her comms went silent. No coordinates, no drone coverage. When she hiked 2 clicks to the secondary pickup, there was no one there. Just a single line in the encrypted SAT feed. Final asset compromised. Asset presumed lost. That was the day Captain Evelyn Ward died. Reeve turned toward her fully now, expression less composed. We didn't know if you'd make it out. There was no confirmation. There was no attempt to confirm, she corrected softly, and no request to return. She hadn't spoken those words before, not even to herself. The contractors took a half step closer, unsure whether to speak. One of them opened his mouth, but Reeve raised a single hand, and it wasn't a threat. It was final. She doesn't need to prove anything to you, Reeve said. Calm, but firm. The taller contractor swallowed hard. We didn't mean any. I know exactly what you meant, Reeve interrupted, but now you understand why that's a problem. They both nodded, eyes lowered, and then almost sheepishly stepped back behind the yellow safety line. Evelyn watched the exchange without comment. She didn't need to. Reeve turned back to her, voice now carrying something different. Not command, not protocol. Regret. Shadow Viper was never meant to end the way it did. We lost too many, too fast, and the politics, they were brutal. Evelyn leaned against the bench, arms crossed, the edge of her sleeve slipping back down over the barcode. We did what we were trained to do, she said. We made decisions others didn't want to see, but when things went wrong, they needed someone to bury. And you let them, Reeves said, surprised by his own words. She met his gaze. I wasn't interested in fighting the system anymore. I just wanted peace. He studied her face. Weathered, calm, but unbroken. Not a trace of apology, only acceptance. And have you found it? He asked. I found enough, she said. Bear Hollow lets me work with my hands, stay sharp, teach when I want to be useful without being used. Reeve nodded slowly. Some of our new instructors, young ones, have mentioned this place in reports, he said. Didn't give names, just said it was quietly exceptional. Now I know why. I didn't build it to be a recruitment ground. I know, but if they want to learn, she added, I'll teach them. Not the way the manuals do, the way it actually works. Reeve considered that for a long moment. You were the best we had, he said quietly. Still are. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. Then maybe you should have told me that before you signed me off. The wind picked up again, brushing pine needles along the concrete pad. Reeve reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black patch, no emblem, just a stitched square with a single Viper etched into the thread, the kind given only to active Shadow Viper Command Liaison. He placed it gently on the bench beside her rifle. You earned this 10 times over, he said. She looked at it for a moment, then slid it into her case without a word. No acceptance, no rejection, just memory. Reeves straightened, adjusted his coat, and took a half step back. You never stopped being one of us. I just stopped being useful to someone else's version of us, she said. He paused as if weighing his next words carefully. If there's anything you need, protection, resources, reconnection, say the word. She shook her head. I chose this. I'm not hiding. I'm just not broadcasting. He gave her a long final look, then understood. He turned, and as he did, the contractors scrambled to get out of his path. One of them looked like he wanted to speak again. Maybe apologize, but thought better of it. Good instinct. Reeve walked off the line without another word, leaving only the sound of wind and the faint clatter of brass as a new shooter reloaded somewhere downrange. Evelyn stood alone again, exactly where she'd chosen to be. By the end of the week, the quiet around Bear Hollow Range had changed. Not visibly, not loudly, but in ways that those who frequented the place could feel. There was a different kind of silence in the air, one that wasn't just about discipline, but about respect. It started with the regulars. They didn't say much, but they adjusted. Guys who used to talk gear too loud started keeping their voices low. People who once strutted up to lane assignments now waited for a nod before stepping past the gravel. The contractors didn't return. Word, as it always does, traveled sideways. A friend told a friend. A reservist mentioned something to a full-timer back on base. A Marine lieutenant scribbled a note in his range journal and left it open on a bench where others could read. If you ever make it to Bear Hollow, be quiet. Watch lane 7. There's someone there who doesn't miss and doesn't need you to ask why. That was all it took. By the following month, young shooters from Fort Whitlow began arriving in 2s and 3s on weekends. They didn't come in formation. They didn't announce their rank. They came in ball caps and plain t-shirts, rifles slung low, notebooks tucked into their back pockets. They watched first, sat on the sidelines, took note of the way Evelyn moved when she was on the line, how she checked the wind with a single lift of dust, how her adjustments were made in millimeters, not inches. Some days she didn't speak at all. Other times, she'd walk behind someone's bench, lean down, and say something so simple it rewired the way they thought about the rifle. You're holding too tight. Let it settle into you. Or, your eye relief's inconsistent. Bring the stock back half an inch and forget what the manual says. She didn't explain her background, didn't hand out credentials, but the impact was immediate. One junior Air Force sniper candidate wrote home that he learned more in 2 weekends at Bear Hollow than in 6 months of formal instruction. Not because of the curriculum, but because she teaches like she's already seen every mistake I'm about to make. Her feedback was rarely more than a sentence. Sometimes she left no words, just a marked-up target with a pen circle and a tape note that said, "You were close." Here's where the wind took it. It wasn't training. It was something older, something deeper. People stopped calling her ma'am. They just called her Evelyn. That, too, was a kind of recognition. General Reeve didn't come back the following week or the one after. But before he'd left that first day, he'd walked the perimeter of the range slowly, like he was trying to memorize it. When he reached the gate, he turned once more toward the bench where she'd packed away her rifle. He didn't salute, didn't speak loudly. He just said, "Low and sure, we used to think you were a tactical asset, but you were something else entirely, something we didn't know how to protect." Then he left. That line made its way into the range office logbook. One of the instructors who'd overheard it, former Marine, still walked with a limp, wrote it on the inside cover of his range notes, passed it to a student. That student copied it again, and so it went. Evelyn noticed the shift, but she didn't change her rhythm. She still opened Bear Hollow every morning at 7:30, still swept brass after closing, still tightened every screw on the benches herself, whether they needed it or not. On slow days, she took apart rifles brought in for maintenance. Her hands moved with the same precision they used in her old life. But now, there was no countdown clock, no mission brief, no Overwatch channel in her ear, just steel, oil, and silence. The rifle she used most often remained the same one from her service days. From a distance, it looked ordinary, standard configuration, plain walnut stock. But if you got close enough to see past the dust and wear, you might notice the faint engraving on the underside. A coiled viper, stylized, barely visible, etched so lightly into the wood, it seemed to fade, unless the light caught it just right. Next to it, barely deeper, were the digits SV9. No one ever asked about it directly, but the ones who knew didn't need to. One day, a young Army captain lingered after the others had packed up. He waited until she'd finished cleaning her bench, then asked softly, "Did you were you with the teams that never made it to the news?" Evelyn looked at him, eyes steady, then gave a small nod. The captain didn't follow up. He just said, "Thank you," and left behind a hand-sold challenge coin at her table. No name, no note, just the emblem of a reconnaissance battalion, worn and real. She didn't display it. She didn't collect those things, but she kept it in the drawer where she stored extra range flags, a place only she opened. Every now and then, people brought up rumors, talked in low voices about the sniper ghost or the woman with the barcode. Evelyn never confirmed or denied. She just kept showing up, kept shooting straight, kept her promises quiet and her lessons quieter. No memorials, no medals, no reunions, only steel targets and the hush that came after a perfect shot. Sometimes she'd sit alone after close, watching the sun slip behind the ridge. Her rifle would rest across her lap, her gloves folded on top. She never needed to be seen to be remembered. That was the difference. Recognition had never been the goal. The final Tuesday of fall, a young Marine approached with a question about shooting uphill in variable wind. Evelyn answered with a gesture, just a fingertip motion toward the reticle, then stepped back. He smiled, nodded, and said, "You don't talk much, but somehow I always leave here better." She didn't reply, just watched him line up the shot. Back in the equipment shed, as the last light faded, Evelyn unlocked the tall storage cabinet. The key clicked once. The metal groaned open. Inside was her rifle, cleaned and placed back on its rack. She paused for a moment, fingertips tracing the engraving near the buttstock. The Viper was faint now, dulled with time, but still present, still hers. She closed the door, turned the key, and let the silence return. She didn't need anyone to know who she was. As long as the shots still landed where they were meant to, that was, subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where quiet strength is celebrated, and every hero's story finds a voice.